A couple of presentations ago, we presented the subject of the origin of the oceans. It was there where creationists felt they had a fairly strong case in talking about the Genesis flood, explaining rather well the fossil layers and sedimentary rock that we have in the world. Today we talk about the origin of the Earth. And we're talking about the age of the Earth and the way that science today uses methods to date the age of rocks. Here is a place where evolutionists feel they have a strong answer, a strong point to make. Right now, we're going to take a look at that evidence, and I'm going to hand everything over once again to our local hosts. And again, thank you so much for coming.
The origin of the debate. Okay, how did this come about? How is the idea of evolution drawn into this? Our second night, we talked about what? Anybody remember?
Was it all bones? Was it bones?
It's about bones. It was about bones. We talked about the origin of man. So that's where the rubber meets the road. You know, where are we from? Where are we from? Our third night, Sebastian, you might remember that. Yeah, we talked about the origin of oceans. We talked about the Genesis flood and the fossil record. And then the fourth night, last Thursday, dinosaurs. We looked at dinosaurs. So today we're going to take a look at the Earth, the origin of the Earth. This is an area where evolutionists, conventional science believe they have the best argument. Because they have evidence out there, or supposed evidence out there, that says that the Earth is billions of years old. And that the fossil record, the layers in the fossil record are hundreds of millions of years old. So we're going to be taking a look at that. Let me share a quote with you from science. And I'm going to try to walk you through this. It's a pretty heavy quote here. The most widely used mutation rate for non-coding human mitochondrial DNA. Who's still with me? Okay. Mitochondria are little energy providing units in your cell. The nucleus in the cell is not the only thing that has DNA. Mitochondria has DNA as well. And the DNA in your mitochondria you got entirely from your mother. The DNA in your nucleus you got both from your mom and dad. Okay? But the mitochondria you got only from your mother. And so scientists have studied the DNA in mitochondria, saying, okay, we're only working with one gender here, to see, okay, how long ago was the first mother? How long ago was the first mother? And they have assumed rate of mutations. And so if you have a great deal of variation among two sets of DNA, the assumption is all these mutations took place at a certain amount of time, therefore this DNA is this much older than that DNA. Am I making sense here? That's what a mutational rate means. Non-coding, you can skip that word. Mitochondrial DNA does not code for your genes. It does not impact your physical Okay, so let's go through it again. The most widely used mutation rate for non-coding human mitochondrial DNA relies on estimates of the date when humans and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor, taken to be 5 million years ago. What does this mean? Circular reasoning is being used here. All right, what is being said is that this DNA from this specimen has this many mutations differing from this specimen over here. And since chimps and humans broke lines about 5 million years ago, this means mutations have occurred at this rate. You see what I'm saying? It's a circular reasoning type thing. They assume the model of evolution and then read into that a mutational rate. But a few studies have begun to suggest that the actual rates are much faster. Since we began observing the human genome, since we began studying DNA and mitochondria, now we can start looking at different generations to get an idea of how fast mutational rates are taking place. All right, we don't have to base it on assumptions, evolutionary assumptions. We can actually watch it happening. Am I making sense so far? I got you, Ryan? Okay. Evolutionists are most concerned about the effect of a faster mutation rate. Why is that? Researchers have calculated that the mitochondrial Eve, that is, who is the mother of all human beings? Okay, that's the mitochondrial Eve. Researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve lived 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. So based on their studies of mitochondrial DNA, since they see much more variation among African ethnicities, they assume much more mutation has taken place in that mitochondria DNA. So the assumption is that the human race began in Africa 100,000, 200,000 years ago, and it spread out from there. Okay, it makes sense. However, using the new clock, mitochondrial Eve would be how old?
6,000.
6,000 years old. And yet, Ann Gibbons, this is in 1998, says no one thinks that's the case. Well, I don't think she's talked to a creationist yet. Why do I say that? Well, as we look at the age of the earth, so much depends on your worldview. Remember, we talked about that in the first lecture. We talked about your worldview. Are you looking at it from a biblical creationist perspective, or are you looking at it from an atheistic evolutionary perspective? Everything depends on your perspective. If you're looking at it from the evolutionary atheistic perspective, you come to the conclusion that life on Earth is hundreds of millions of years old, and that humans evolved from a lower primate, lower form of primate. Archbishop James Ussher, in the 1600s, calculated what he believed to be the age of the earth. He believed that God started creating the world on Sunday, October 29th in 4004 BC. How did he come in? And some of his colleagues said, yeah, he started at 9 in the morning. How did he come up with that idea? We'll talk about that a little bit more. And this was the belief among most geologists for quite a while. And we talked about this man already. James Hutton, he is referred to as the father of modern geology. He proposed what's called uniformitarianism. Everybody remember? Can everybody see that word? Uniformitarianism. All right, remember that word? We talked about that, where he said that all the geological processes that took place in the past are the same that are taking place today. There's been no rate change. So the erosion of the continents, sedimentary buildup in other areas, that rate has always been the same. That's uniformitarianism. And so it's altered only by currently observable processes, not flood. So he dismissed the flood story. He dismissed the flood account. And he said that according to his theory of the earth, we find no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. So just looking at what we see today, the rates we see going on today, I see no beginning. I see no end. And many have clasped to that idea because when you look at the formations we see in the earth today, it's hard to believe that they happen so quickly. It happens so quickly. How is it that this mountain is not hundreds of thousands of years old? Well, Charles Lyell picked up where James Hutton left off, and he wrote probably one of the most influential books in geology called The Principles of Geology. I think it was a 3-volume set. And he imagined the earth to be perhaps millions of years old. He believed it was perhaps millions of years old. Then William Thomson came along, and he studied heat loss in the earth. And he said, based on heat loss, boy, we couldn't be around, we had to be around a certain amount of time. He estimated the earth to be between 20 and 40 million years old. All right, so we got Charles Lyell, who felt millions of years, and then this man, 20 to 40 million years ago. Ernest Rutherford studied radioactivity, and he said, what this other guy said about the heat loss, No, because we have radioactive decay going on, that's generating heat. It could be preserved a lot longer than that. And he imagined the Earth to be even older than Thomson did. Some of his colleagues estimated 2.2 billion years old. Okay. Well, guess what? The conventional belief today is that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. They believe it's 4.5 billion years old. And much of this is, as we're going to see, is going to be based on radioactive decay rate aging. So remember what we mentioned before is that the Bible for geologists, conventional geologists today anyway, is the geological column. So you have these different strata that have been laid down over time, and they contain different fossils. So here is the geological column chart put next to it. The numbers you see all the way to the left are the estimated ages of these columns in millions of years. So the Precambrian is 4.5 billion years, Cambrian 570 million, etc. And when we come to the dinosaurs in the Mesozoic, Midlife, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, that's from 230 million years to 66. Some say 66, 65, this says 63. And so when we look at the fossil record, it appears several things have taken place. Life appeared in the Cambrian section. Plants and animals invaded the land during the Devonian. At the beginning of Devonian, dinosaurs and mammals appear. In the Mesozoic, first flowers appear. During Cretaceous, people appear. During the Pleistocene era. And then you had several extinctions going on as well. A major marine extinction based on the fossil record in the Mississippi. Dinosaurs and mammals, dinosaurs extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. How did all this take place? They believe that this is a history unfolded for us of life itself throughout hundreds of million years old. You know, it'd be great if rocks came along with a date stamp. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It'd be great if we could pick up a rock and it had a time stamp on it that says, I was formed in such and such a year. Okay. Well, this is the Plymouth Rock, and it's commemorating when the first pilgrims came to Massachusetts. But how can we tell how old the rock is? Can we tell how old the rock is? Because we look at these rock strata here. Is there a way we can tell when they were laid down? Now, Sebastian, I know you knew this answer because you shared this last Tuesday. The three different types of rocks are the sedimentary rocks. Those are created when sand or sediment is laid down, they're compressed together, and they form rock. Then there's the igneous rock. These are formed when you have lava, and it cools and it forms a rock. Magma or lava, it cools and it forms a rock. And then you have the metamorphic. Igneous rock is the only one that is considered to be datable. Well, how is it datable? We're going to get into a little bit of chemistry here. Do you remember the nucleus of an atom, what it contains? Protons and neutrons. And then going around the atom are electrons, okay? Well, there are some elements that are considered, that are called unstable. And at some point they begin shedding particles. So for example, here's a picture of uranium-238. It is an unstable element. And it begins shedding either 2 protons and 2 neutrons, or 1 proton, 1 neutron, gamma rays, an electron as well. And it goes through different phases, shedding material, becoming some other element. That sheds material, becomes some other element. And finally, it settles into lead-206, which is a stable element. Lead-206 does not decay. So in this case, the uranium-238 is referred to as the mother element. The lead-206 is referred to as the daughter element. Okay? This is radioactive decay. And the rate at which it sheds these things is considered to be constant. And so that's how a determination is made for the age of the rock. Before we get too much further, I want to point out that there's some really critical assumptions using radioactive decay. So we come across a rock, we see a certain percentage of uranium-238, we see a certain percentage of lead-206, and from there we can calculate a date. This rock began at such and such a date. Well, the first assumption is that the decay rate has always been the same. That's the first assumption. That it never slowed down and it never sped up. That's the first assumption. The second assumption is that we know that it was all one element to begin with. Okay? That when this rock was formed, there was no lead-206 in it. It was all uranium-238. That's an assumption. Okay? That's an assumption. We were not there when the rock was formed. We can't say that for sure. The third assumption is that the area was, or the rock itself was isolated. It was not infiltrated with other material. So for example, no lead seeped into it. No uranium seeped out of it. Okay, so that's the other assumption in this as well. These are three critical assumptions when it comes to radioactive decay and radiometric dating. Let's just walk through an example here about radiometric dating. So to begin with, we have here the mother material, or the mother isotope. That's in the green, and in the, I call that green, but I'm sure some of my female friends here have another name for that color.
Green.
It's green.
Foam.
Okay, what would you call this color?
Blue.
Okay, that's what I would have used. I'm impressed because whenever I just use those regular numbers, I get told no, that's magnolium, or that's, you know. So anyway, okay, green and blue. All right, so in the green, you had at the very beginning, you had only the parent isotope, or the parent element at the very beginning at noon. Okay, and none of the daughter element. You had none of that whatsoever. Okay, but let's say the half-life of this element is 1 hour. That means within an hour, you have only half of the parent element left, okay? And the other half has decayed into the daughter element. All right, that's what is meant by a half-life. The remaining half, it slows down the decay. And you don't get rid of the remaining half the next half hour. You get rid of half of that half. And now you're down to a fourth in the second hour. Does that make sense? And we've got an eighth bit in the third hour, and then finally a 16th of it in the fourth hour. So this is what's referred to this is what is meant by half-life. So when we come to this and we measure how much of the parent element do I have, how much of the daughter element do I have? Oh, I see a 16th of it is the parent, or the mother element, and 15/16 of it is the daughter. That means that this rock is 4 years old, 4 hours old. Does that make sense? That's how radiometric dating is carried out. Now, we can do dating on the igneous rocks, and we can do dating on organic material as well. Organic material are those things that used to be alive, plants or animals. And this is called carbon-14 dating. This method is used for dating organic materials, things that were once alive. It measures, so carbon-14, like that uranium-238, goes through a decay process. It goes through a decay process. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. So that means after 5,730 years, you should find half carbon-14 and half carbon-12. Make sense? Then another 5,730 years, you'll find how much carbon-14? One fourth, yes, 1/4, and then 3/4 carbon-12. It cannot be used to get dates in millions of years, but it routinely, quote, gives dates that are older than biblical chronologies. So where does carbon-14 come from? And how do they use carbon-14 to interpret dates? Let's take a look at that. Okay, nitrogen in our atmosphere gets hit by solar radiation or something from space, and it comes, nitrogen-14 begins breaking up, and one of the results of that is carbon-14. So we have carbon-14 in the air based on sunlight or material from outer space that hits the nitrogen in the atmosphere. Well, carbon-14, carbon dioxide is picked up by plants. All right, it's picked up by plants, and guess what they produce? It produces oxygen. So carbon-14 is in the plant, and then you have animals who eat the plants, and so guess what goes into their system? Carbon-14. Carbon-14. And so while it lives, that carbon-14 is still in there, it's still ingested, but then someday that little critter dies. And no more carbon-14 is being brought into the system. At that point, carbon-14 begins to decay in that dead creature, or in that dead plant, or in that thing that used to be alive. Carbon-14 begins to decay. It goes back to nitrogen-14 and also carbon-12. It goes back into carbon-12 as well. So this is how we, when we look at that creature and we measure how much carbon-14 is in it and how much carbon-12 is in it, from there we deduce that this creature died such and such a time, so long ago. Okay? But remember some of the assumptions. One of the assumptions is that this creature was isolated and that it did not have any of the daughter element in it already. Okay? It did not have any of the carbon-12 in it already. However, volcanoes eject lots of carbon-12 into the atmosphere. All right? And this could lead to more carbon-12 in plants and animals, giving a false older reading. So you breathe in, and you can breathe in some carbon-12 as well. You've got some carbon-12 in your system. You're dead, and you look like you died thousands of years ago, based on this radiometric dating. That makes sense? Now, Robert E. Lee. Anybody know who Robert E. Lee is? Not that Robert E. Lee. Not the one from the Civil War. But this anthropologist, Robert E. Lee, in his article, Radiocarbon, Ages of Error, he said the following. The troubles, and this is the man who uses radiocarbon dating. The troubles of radiocarbon dating method are undeniably deep and serious. The troubles of radiocarbon dating are undeniably deep and serious. It should be no surprise then that fully half of the dates are rejected. Do you hear that? Among scientists, when they do analysis to determine a date, half of the dates that they come across are rejected. The wonder is surely that the remaining half come to be accepted. There are gross discrepancies. The chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are actually selected dates. And this is common among conventional scientists. As we're going to see with other dating methods, they pick the dates that best fit their theories, rather than what an actual date might be. Okay, here's the lava flow right here. When a volcano erupts, we talked about the carbon-12, but this lava has the potassium-40 in it. Potassium-40 decays to argon-40, the gas argon-40. And the half-life is 1,250,000,000 years. 1.25 billion years. Okay? So what that says is when I have a rock here, it started all with potassium-40, and after 1.25 billion years, half of it will be potassium-40, and I'll have some argon gas trapped in it as well. All right, so here's another example of radiometric dating. Now, the problem, the challenge for creationists is the following. Between some of the fossil layers, we find lava deposits. And when those are dated, they come out with dates of tens to hundreds of millions of years. How can that be if these were all laid down by the flood? How can that be? So this is a real challenge for creationists, because creationists believe that all these were laid down. Most of them were laid down during the flood. How can it be? Well, we're going to take a look at 4 issues that we're going to come across with these timetables based on radiometric dating. Number 1, we're going to find that some radiometric dates do not add up. We're going to take a look at that. Number 2, we're going to see that there are a lot of living fossils. What do I mean by that? Hold on to your hat, we're going to cover that, or your hoodie, and we'll cover that in just a moment. We're going to find that there's missing strata, missing rock strata as well. And that's confusing. That's very confusing for evolutionists. And we'll find out about that as well. And then we're going to see that there are actually miracles of preservation. And we talked a little bit about this when we took a look at dinosaurs last Thursday. So let's take a look at the first one, radiometric dates that do not add up. So this is the basaltic rock. Remember, basalt rock comes from what? Lava flow. Okay, lava flowed, it hardened, and it became basalt rock. Okay, so this is on top of the Grand Canyon. And so 6 different samples were taken, and you had the potassium to argon dates measured by that. Now, by the way, you know sometimes when someone replies to your text and they just say K? Okay? One time, someone replied to my wife, to her text, and she said potassium. We're wondering, what does she mean by that? Well, in the elementary table, potassium is K. It's K. So you want to flip someone out, just say, potassium in your reply. Anyway, so when they did 6 samples of potassium to argon, they had a date range from 0.01 million years to 17 million years. 6 different samples in that layer had a wide discrepancy of dates. Okay? They also tried rubidium to strontium, and that came out to 1270 to 1390 million years. Very different from potassium to argon. Again, this was 5 samples that they did of the strontium, rubidium to strontium. Rubidium to strontium was called isomer. I won't get too deep into that. Only 1 sample that had 1340 million years. Lead to lead isomer, 2600 million years. So you see the age ranges have a great discrepancy in this one layer of basalt. Okay? Now, what conventional scientists generally do is they look at all these samples, they look at all these different dates, and they say, based on the model that we have, this layer is 1270 million years or so, so we're going to take this date here, we're going to take that sample here, and throw out the rest. That's normally what is done. And when you hear it in the news, or when you read in headlines that such and such material was dated at this, understand that there may have been many more samples taken, and that's the one that was selected by the scientist who was doing the research at that point. Okay? I'm not trying to down them, I'm just pointing out that these discrepancies are an issue, but you don't hear about it in the media. Now, there is also a basalt layer in the Precambrian in that same formation. They said, hey, let's do some dating on that layer as well. According to the model, they had this layer should have been laid down long before this layer here. So these should come up with older dates, right? The layer of the Precambrian should come up with older dates. Well, guess what? Potassium argon, that is the case. They did 5 samples, 791 to 853 million years ago. That is much older than the one up on top. But the others, rubidium to strontium, potassium to argon isomer, and rubidium to strontium isomer, they came out with dates that were actually less than the layer up on top. So you see there's a vast discrepancy in the dates that come out on these tests. Now, good news is we know many rocks in the world, we know their age. And we can do radiometric dating on them. So, for example, Mount St. Helens erupted, 1986? Okay? But you do some dating on some of the rocks that were formed by that volcanic eruption, and they come up to 2.8 billion years. We know that's not the case. It's only 40 years old or so right now. And yet, radiometric dating is coming out to 2.8 billion years. And you have all these other examples as well. Mount Etna erupted twice, and you got this, dates that are hundreds of thousands of years older than that. Mount Lucerne in 1915, 110,000 years. How can that be? Did I say 2.8 billion?
Yeah.
2.8 million. 2.8 million. My apologies. Yes. But still, it's quite a discrepancy. Quite a discrepancy. How could this happen? Someone might ask. Why would that be happening? Again, the assumptions is that the rock began with only the mother element. The assumption is that the decay rate has always been the same, and the assumption is that there's been no contamination. None of the mother element has leaked out. None of the daughter element has leaked in. And these show us that this dating system cannot be trusted, cannot be fully trusted. This mountain here, or this island here, Surtsey Island, over in Iceland. Guess how old this island is? No. It's 1 year younger than me. It was born in 1963 by a volcanic eruption. Yeah, look at it today. It's thriving with plant life and animals as well. If we didn't know that this was born in 1963, we came and looked at that, came over and took some tests on there, the assumption would be, by conventional science, that this was millions of years old or so. But it's only about 60 years old right now. Only about 60 years old. This is a rock that was drawn from the Jurassic period. That's the middle Miocene, that is during the dinosaur age. And the dating for this was picked at 189 million years old. However, there's a tree stump in there. And remember, tree stump used to live. So guess what kind of dating can we do on that tree stump? Carbon-14 dating. And that comes out to 20 to 28,000 years. How could it be that a 28,000-year-old tree is stuck in a 189 million year old rock? How can that be? So you see the two different systems give dating discrepancies. So one of the issues is the inconsistencies within radiometric dating itself. Another issue for dating the Earth is living fossils. What do I mean by living fossil? I don't mean, a set of bones gathered together and start walking around and it's alive. Now, that's not what I'm saying there. What I'm saying is we have found, and we're finding more creatures that were thought to have been extinct hundreds of millions of years ago. This is the coelacanth. The coelacanth is found in the layers of strata which is believed to be 400 million years old and is believed to be extinct. And this was pointed out by evolutionists as a transitional figure. You see those fins down at the bottom? The belief was that at some point its ancestors migrated to the land and those fins became feet and it began walking around on land. Well, guess what? In 1938, some fishermen off the coast of New Zealand found a coelacanth. And this woman was from the museum in South Africa. She heard about it and she ran to where the fishermen were, but they already gutted the fish. So, all right, at least take a picture of me with it. She goes, if you ever find a fish like this again, don't kill it. Let me know. I want it. Well, she didn't have to look too long. They're thriving off the coast of Madagascar and South Africa today. A fish that looks exactly like its fossil, supposedly 400 million years ago, and yet no changes. No changes. No changes to it. Everybody know what this is? Have you seen one? Live? You found a shell of one? Yeah, those are awesome. They're off the East Coast here in the United States. Well, guess what? This is supposedly 400 million years old as well. That's found in the strata that's dated to that as well. And so here again, we have another example of a living fossil, a creature that looks exactly like the fossil record indicates, but hasn't changed during all that time. Well, we have many other creatures. You'd see the same thing as well. Here's Middle Jurassic fossils. I think they're 150 million years or something like that old, and yet they look like they do today. Except we do have fossils of 2-foot-long dragonflies. There are fossils of 2 foot. Imagine if a 2-foot-long dragonfly was flying around, what would you do?
Probably try and catch it.
Try to catch it? Hats off to you.
And take pictures of it.
Take pictures of it. Yeah, definitely take pictures of it. Yeah, and the museum would tell you, no, that can't be because they died 150 million years ago. Okay, so this is Wollemi National Park in Australia. One time, the associate ranger, Dave Noble, he told his boss, I'm going to go out and look at the different landscape that's only accessible by rope. And he came across this fern tree that had not been seen before. He took a specimen back, and they discovered that, wait a minute, this is the same as, this is the Willemmy pine, which was supposed to be 200 million years, extinct 200 million years ago. So here's just another example of a living fossil. You may remember we looked at this when we looked at dinosaurs. These are what looked to be bird prints during the Triassic age. Remember what Ricardo Melchor said, that these tracks are significant because we find footprints with morphology, that is, body shapes, identical to modern birds in rocks that predate by 55 million years the first record of true birds. Saying, how can this be? 55 million years before birds were supposed to have evolved, we find bird tracks. So, radiometric inconsistencies, living fossils, and another issue is the missing rock strata. And we're going to look at one example here. This is what's called the Great Unconformity in the Grand Canyon. So here you have the Precambrian, and we have about 1 billion years missing until we get to this next strata here. About 1 billion years missing. How can that be possible? If evolution is true, if uniformitarianism is true, there should have been sediment buildup for 1 billion years before we get to this strata here, and yet that's not the case. That's not the case. How do creationists explain this? The belief is that with plate tectonics, you had masses of rock layers being moved all around, and at times you find in the geological column in some places one older strata above a younger strata. And that happens often throughout the world. It's a phenomenon that happens often throughout the world. And so this was shuffled over from one spot to another before the other sediment layers were allowed to be put in place. But here's one that's really interesting. Another issue for dating the Earth is the miracle of preservation. What does that mean? Again, we talked about this when we talked about dinosaurs last Thursday. Since 2005, I mentioned in 2005, Mary Schweitzer, I think she's a paleontologist, she found soft tissue in a dinosaur bone. And she could not believe it. And her colleagues could not believe it. Because dinosaurs supposedly went extinct 65 million years ago. And soft tissue such as blood cell, collagen, etc., cannot survive for that long, and yet there it is. And since that time, it's been a normal find for dinosaurs and even older creatures. Since 2005, scientists, when studying the inside of T-Rex bone, proteins have been found in a Triceratops, a duck-billed dinosaur, that's the hadrosaur, dinosaur eggs from Argentina, an embryonic sauropod from China, an Archaeopteryx from Germany, a seismosaur from New Mexico, 2 mosasaurs from Kansas and Belgium, a scorpion and a lizard. And the list continues. To this day, it's a common occurrence to find soft tissue in supposedly creatures that supposedly died tens to hundreds of millions of years ago. So this is an issue for the supposed old age of the Earth. Another problem with the supposed old age of the Earth. Here's an upright fossil plant in the Cumberland Basin in Nova Scotia. So this is the stem here that is in what's called the Pennsylvanian strata. That strata supposedly took 25 million years to form, and yet this plant is upright in it. How did that plant live for 25 million years while the sediments were being laid down around it? It doesn't make sense. These are referred to as polystrate fossils. Polystrate, poly mean multiple, straight means stratum. So we have many fossils that cut across the different strata of the geological column. How can that be? Geologists themselves, conventional geologists themselves say this can only happen with rapid burial. This can only happen with rapid burial. It couldn't have been over tens of millions of years. Here's another interesting note there. You've got different minerals that supposedly took hundreds of thousands to millions of years to form. And yet we're discovering more and more that all of these can be formed in a very short amount of time. You know where oil comes from? Oil comes from a whole bunch of dead bodies. Whole bunch of dead bodies. So a whole bunch of organic creatures were squished together, pressed together, heated, cooked, and that became oil. So when you're driving your car, keep in mind you're driving off of dead bodies. Okay?
It's okay then. That's not disturbing at all.
Oh, when you're heating your house too. Heating house. Thank God for the flood. So here is Mammoth Springs in Yellowstone. Here is a calcium carbonate buildup. It's happening on a daily basis. You can watch it before your very eyes. Again, it was taught that this takes thousands to millions of years to happen, and yet it's happening on a daily basis before our eyes. Stalactites. Anybody know what stalactites are? What are stalactites?
Yeah, the formation from season down.
Yeah, and the one from the bottom up is stalagmites. Yeah, hey, we got some serious geologists here. And so it was believed that stalactites took many years, thousands of years to form. And yet we're discovering that they form very quickly. In fact, when you break open a stalactite, you can see that formation occurred very rapidly at one point and then began gradual growth after that. So here's an interesting quote regarding Carlsbad Caverns, where you saw that picture of the stalactites. It said, from 1924 to 1988, there was a visitor sign above the entrance to the caverns that said Carlsbad was at least 260 million years old. Okay? Well, in 1988, the sign was changed to read 7 to 10 million years old. Then, for a little while, the sign read that it was 2 million years old. Well, now the sign is gone. Because we're discovering these things can be generated so quickly, like the Surtsey Islands. These things can happen so quickly, it is defying the common view of long ages. So, uniformitarianism, which has largely been embraced by geologists, has a lot of issues that are confronting it. In fact, I shared with you before that many in conventional science are starting to embrace what's called graduated catastrophism. That local catastrophes happened here and there, and that's where we get the geological phenomena that we have. So, for example, the erosion of continents. If the erosion of continents were happening all along at the rate that we see today, and the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, then continents would have been buried many times over throughout the history of the Earth. Okay? So that there challenges uniformitarianism. The Earth's magnetic field is going through a decay rate right now as well. And if the rate has always been the same, and the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, then there were hundreds of millions of years, not billions of years, where the magnetic field would have been too strong for life. It would have been too strong for life. Too much helium in rocks. Remember how many electrons, how many protons in helium? There's 2. So helium seeps out very easily. It seeps out very easily, and the easier it seeps out, the quicker it seeps out. And if the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and those those strata were laid down over hundreds or tens of millions of years, we should not find any helium in those rocks, in those lower strata, and yet we do. We do. We find helium in diamonds. We find helium in diamonds, which are indicating that they form very rapidly as well. Very interesting. So at this point now, we're going to watch a video clip that covers some of these same things.
One of the greatest questions in the subject of origins has to do with how old life is on planet Earth. Evolutionists tend to think billions of years. Creationists tend to think thousands of years. Some of this boils down to the subject of how old are the rocks. Now, when we date igneous rocks like lava here at the Kilauea volcano on the island of Hawaii, we find out that there's potassium, a metalloid, and argon, a gas. And how long it takes for potassium to break down in argon is a way of determining how old the lava is. So let's take a look now at these methods of dating and take a look and see how reliable they might be.
In my view, what is the biggest challenge for a creationist model scientifically? I would say probably the issue of dating, the issue of the age that is attributed to rocks formations, or the time that is actually required for particular geological processes to occur. Therefore, that area, I think, still presents a lot of challenges, and it's something that we need to study, and we are interested in understanding more.
Well, radiometric dating actually is a group of dating methods. It's not a single method. It basically is trying to use radioactive elements. Those are elements who are gradually changing into some other element, and using that to measure how much time has passed. You could think of it sort of like an hourglass. And in fact, people from many different perspectives have used that illustration. The hourglass starts out with parent element at the top, and then it runs through a small area which allows a measured amount of parent element to change into daughter element at the bottom. And if you measure the amount of parent element and you measure the amount of daughter element, you might get a time out of it. Now, of course, there are all kinds of problems with that. One of them is that you don't know for sure always exactly how much parent element you started out with.
So one of the questions is, has the carbon-14 in the atmosphere been constant over time? And in fact, it has not. Everybody recognizes that it's varied. So that depends on the amount of cosmic rays that hit the atmosphere. It's related to the Earth's magnetic field, the shielding from the cosmic rays. And so the carbon-14 community has developed methods of calibrating using tree rings and other methods to estimate what the true age is in comparison with the carbon-14 age. And so carbon-14 is generally accepted by everybody to work quite well for the last few thousand years. The further you go back, the more uncertainty there is based on the calibrations. The radiometric ages are often very difficult for me to understand in a short time frame. I've recently written a book chapter that kind of outlines my approach to these things. And as I work with these ages, as a person who believes in the Bible, I've kind of summarized the way I deal with it under 6 points. One is, I look at the history of science and see that science developed within a Christian framework in Western Europe. And the first scientists, the fathers of science, were Bible-believing Christians. So I believe that it's possible to see God as creator and do good science as I look at his creation in the context of the founding fathers of science. Second, I look at what the big issue is. For me, the big issue is that God is a good and a powerful God. And like Charles Darwin, I have a problem seeing that this good God would specifically create the evil I see in the world and in nature, and I think that God wants to get the bad stuff over as quickly as possible, so the bad stuff will only be there for a limited amount of time. Third, I am anxious to do good science. So as I do my scientific research, I realize I'm studying God's creation, and I'm very careful with the data and not making claims from the data that cannot be supported. Fourth, as I look at the Genesis record, I find evidence for changes in rates. I find the evidence for water being a major geological factor. And therefore, as I do my geology research, I'm looking for evidence for changes in rates of geological processes, the effects of water on the processes I'm working on. The fifth, and probably one of the overarching pictures that I use, is I recognize my own human limitations, that God is so much greater than I am, that he has 1,000 ways to do things that I don't know anything about. And although I feel like evidence and reason is extremely important, I realize that there needs to be more than that, and God has many ways to do things. And finally, number 6, as I am working on understanding the natural world, and as I'm working on understanding on how it's related to the Bible, I find it very important to treat people well. And it's easy to denigrate people on one side or another, but I don't find that to be helpful. Sometimes I don't do a very good job of living up to that goal, but I do find that to be very important, that I treat people well, both the people that I agree with and the people that I may not agree with. So, radiometric dating is a difficult topic, but I found that these 6 guidelines help me in knowing how to deal with some of the difficulties.
So what these rocks are doing is what all igneous rocks are doing. In fact, we might say all of creation, in a way, as we are all seeing movement toward decay. Rocks are decaying. And why is that? If you have an old Geiger counter, you can pick up the ticks, the radioactivity of some kinds of rocks. Those rocks are decaying. That's why you get those clicks. So what is it about our creation that is decaying? Why is it going apart, falling apart? Let's take a look in the Bible and see if we can find answers for the origins of decay.
I want to just point out one thing that last interviewee said is doing good science. I believe that in much of the scientific community today, you depend on funding. If you don't get funding, you're not going to have your job, you're not going to be able to do your research. And so you may be pressured to present results which may not be authentic. Early scientists, they were doing their research without that kind of pressure. I believe the only way to do really good science is to do it in the fear of the Lord, and not under political pressure like that. The other thing I want to point out, and I shared this before, is if you ever get a chance, you can look up on YouTube Steve Austin, Mount St. Helens. He did an extensive study on Mount St. Helens when it was erupting. He pointed out that the phenomena which conventional science has taught takes hundreds of thousands to millions of years, happened within days. It happened within days. There was a baby Grand Canyon, I think we talked about that last week, that was cut out within 5 days. We had a layer of peat at the bottom of Spirit Lake within a matter of days. We had floating trees that floated upright and went down while the sediment was still there. So we had partially partially buried trees with no roots. We find that at Yellowstone National Park, and this was just in a matter of days. And so more and more we're discovering that catastrophism better explains the geological phenomena that we see in the world today than uniformitarianism. But radiometric dating is still a big challenge. Why are the rocks coming out with those dates? No one has good answers for that. No one has good answers for that. So let's go back to Archbishop James Ussher. Remember, he came up with the starting dates of the world. What was it, October 29th, 4004 BC? Well, how did he come up with that date? Is because studying the book of Genesis, he saw that there was a lot of chronologies in there. In fact, the first time I read the Bible, I was like, I tried to read the Bible, I think, when I was 14 years old. And I read it. In chapter 5, there was a genealogy. Adam begat Seth, Seth begat this person, and it's okay, all right, let me get through this. Chapter 4, there's a genealogy as well. Cain begat this person. And I said, what are all these genealogies? And then came to chapter 10 after the flood, and there was another genealogy. And I just, is this what the Bible's all about? And I closed the Bible and I put it down, didn't pick it up for another 8 years, and that was the worst mistake of my life. But anyway, the Bible has a lot of genealogies, and it gives you the age of a particular person when they had their such and such a child. So Adam, I think, was 135 years old when he had Seth, and Seth was a certain age when he had his son. And so what Archbishop Ussher did was took that and worked backwards. Noah was such and such years old when the flood took place. The children of Israel were in Egypt for 400 years. 400 or so years later, Solomon built the temple. Well, we know when that was, so now let's work backwards. And that's how he came out with 4004 BC. Now, we're told in the beginning that the earth was without form and void. This is, anybody know what picture that is?
That looks like Neptune.
Looks like Neptune, yeah. So I know we don't have a picture of the earth like it was with just a ball of water. So the presenter just put Neptune up here because it looks like a ball of water. Yes, that's Neptune. Yes, very good. It says the earth was without form and void. Literally, it had only water. Was there earth underneath it? Was there ground underneath it? That's left open to discussion on that. But again, the question that we have is, why do we have lava flows between the different strata of rock that date to millions of years? Without form and without void. From the Hebrew words tohu and bohu. Whenever you see u at the end of the Hebrew word, that means no or not. All right. So it was unformed and it was unfilled. And on the first 3 days, God created those places which he was going to fill in the last 3 days. So on day 1, he created the heavens. On day 4, it said he put the sun and the moon there. Day 2, he created the sky and the sea. On day 5, he put the birds and the fish in there. On day 3, he created dry land. And on day 6, he put the animals and man. So you see a little synchronicity there. But on day 7, totally different day. That was the Sabbath, the 7th day. That's the day that God rested. Now, what's interesting is that we find many different rhythms in nature, and they're all based on some type of astronomical phenomena. The year we measure by when the earth goes around the sun. The month, or the month, is when the moon goes around the earth. In order to line it up with the year, we've added days to particular months. And then the day, of course, is the revolution of the earth. But what about the week? Where did we get a week from? There's nothing in astronomy that lasts 7 days. Where did we get that from? And furthermore, scientists have determined that animal life, mankind especially, has what's called a circumseptan rhythm. That is a 7-day rhythm. You have a cold for 7 days usually, okay? You have the hormone distribution. It has a 7-day cycle. Heart rate, there's a 7-day cycle. You find it's very fascinating. but scientists will tell you today that there are 7-day cycles within the natural world. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? So, in the beginning, when the Bible says that when God was done on the 6th day, indeed it was very good. It was very good. So when God rested that day, he fellowshiped with his perfect creation. There was no carnivores in the world at that time. There was no death. There was no dying. There was no pain. There was no sadness. Everything was in perfect harmony on that day. Mankind's first full day was that 7th day, and that was a day of fellowship with his Creator. But something happened. Sin was introduced. And because of sin, creation has been marred, losing much of its original beauty. Do you remember what their narrator said on the film? Why is there decay? Yes, conventional science is using radioactive decay to determine ages, but why is there decay? God created the world and it was very good, but we see it decaying now. And not just here, but we see the solar. Mercury has a magnetic field. One of the few planets in the solar system, like Earth, that has a magnetic field. There was the Viking probe, I think, that was out there in the 70s. And then another one that came years later, and it found that magnetic field is being decayed as well as the Earth's. Very interesting. So, sin has marred much of the original beauty, and notice this passage in Psalm 102, 25 through 27. Of old, you, God, laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will what?
Perish.
They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all what? Grow old like a garment, like a cloak, you will what? Change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. So the psalmist here is saying, yeah, you created all these things, but they're growing old. Did God create them to grow old initially? No, that's the introduction of sin. They're growing old like a garment. When you have clothes that are too old and you're not going to wear them anymore, what do? You ditch them and you buy something new. You get something new. And the promise here is that God is going to change the heavens and the earth. And he's going to recreate. He's going to recreate. Here's another passage that talks about the decay that we find in nature. Romans 8, 20 through 22. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pains together until now. Creation was subjected to futility. What does that mean here? God said, okay, sin has been introduced. I'm not going to step aside entirely, but I'm going to let nature take its course. And with the introduction of sin, decay has set in. And God allowed that to take place. He can intervene and keep radioactive elements from decaying. He can do that, but he does not. He subjected it to futility. And creation will itself be delivered from the bondage of corruption. So Paul, the author of Romans, is depicting creation now as being enslaved, in a sense, to decay, to corruption. There's nothing we can do about it. All of us are aging. All of us are getting older. What do they say? The two certain things are death and taxes. We're all getting older, and there's nothing we can do to stop that from happening. We are in bondage to corruption. And the whole creation groans. I'm doing that more and more as I get older. And Sherry, my wife, lets me know sometimes when I'm groaning. I'm doing it unconsciously. I don't even realize I'm doing it. And she's 11 years younger than me, and so she doesn't have as many groans. And she mimics my groaning to let me know I'm groaning. Well, the whole creation groans. I got to let her know that. But here's the good news. God, the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it how? In hope. In hope. God says, yes, I've stepped aside a bit to allow nature to take its course, to allow decay, to allow corruption to take place, but I'm doing this for your good, so that you may know that your hope is not in this life. Your hope is not in this world. There's something more to come. And Jesus told us about, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust corrupts, by the way. Here's corrupt again. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys. And here's important to note, that there's something better to come. This earth is decaying. This earth is corrupted. This earth is falling apart. Our bodies are aging. Our bodies are falling apart. But Jesus says there is something better to come, a new heaven and a new earth. And he invites you to be part of that, where there'll be no such thing as carbon-14 decaying to carbon-12, because there will be no dead mice. There will be no death whatsoever. And we'll be alive forever. And I just want to encourage you to seek to be part of that family that will inherit that new earth. Do we have any questions on tonight's session or on anything? Yes, Kelly.
So basically, going back to the Genesis, the earth is what, 5,000 to 6,000 years old?
Yeah, are there genealogies missing? The Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, has another person in there. And so that might make the earth a bit older. Yes, biblical scholars say between 6 and 10,000. 6 and 10,000. The Archbishop there said definitely 4004 BC. But yeah, according to that. And I want to point out that that's according to, that's how old life is, not necessarily how old the earth is. I want to make that very clear. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. And then God said, let there be light. Was there any amount of time between when God created the heavens and the earth and the time when he said, let there be light? Okay, so and we're going to talk more about that on Thursday night. But life definitely is no more than 6,000 years or so. Yeah. Good question. Any other questions, sister?
So I know it sounds kind of crazy to ask this question, but so they basically are saying that the earth, they're dating radioactively the earth based on the rocks.
Yes, yeah.
The level of rocks and the layers of rocks.
Yeah, so the question is, by dating the rocks, we're dating the earth? Yeah, the assumption is this, is that and the only rocks that can be dated are those basalt rocks, the ones that come from magma or lava flow. Because once they solidify, that you see decay going on for certain elements, like the potassium, like the rubidium, etc. And so the assumption is it started off all of the mother elements, and that began decaying into the daughter element. And so if I measure how much mother element there is and how much daughter element it is, that gives me an age of when that lava flow solidified and became rock. And because that lava flow is between these two strata, that means the one below it is older than that rock, and the one above it is younger than that lava-turned rock. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how do they derive it to be millions of years as opposed to thousands? Like, where do they get the concept that it can possibly be millions of years?
Yeah.
Where's that?
Thank you, and that's good. How can you derive that? One thing I didn't mention is that based on current research, based on current analysis today, it is determined that the uranium takes 1.25 billion years to decay into the lead-206. And so you look at how much uranium you got, and you calculate after several years how much of it has turned into lead. Okay, this is going to take 1.25 billion years for half of that to decay to lead. So based on the current rates of decay, we can see, and based on how much we see of the mother element, how much of the daughter element, we come up with such and such a date. But again, it's confounding. We get all these inconsistent dates, and no one has an explanation for that, neither creationists nor evolutionists. But a good question, thank you. And with carbon, that's easier to analyze. We see carbon-14 decomposes to carbon-12 at a certain rate, and so we can measure that. Carbon is only used for organic matter, stuff that used to be living, plant or animals. Potassium, rubidium, these other ones are used for rocks created from magma or lava. Okay. Yes?
With the carbon dating, what is like the amount of carbon-14 like for like mouse?
in an example, wouldn't it depend on how much it was eating?
How much it had at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say the question is a good question is that we don't know how much carbon-14 that house had at the beginning, so how can we make a date? So let's say it had, I'm going to say 10 grams of carbon-14 when it died.
Right.
Half-life, 5,730 years, I think it was. After 5,730 years, there would be 5 grams of carbon-14, 5 grams of carbon-12, half and half. If it had 20 grams of carbon-14 when it died, after 5,730 years or so, it'll be 10 grams of carbon-14, 10 grams of carbon-12. So it doesn't matter how much it started with, it's the ratio of the daughter element, mother element to daughter element.
What I'm saying is like not knowing how much there was when it died.
Yeah.
It would make it hard, because you could have, 2 mice that died on the same day, let's say, with different levels.
Right, yeah.
But if you didn't know for sure when they died, you wouldn't know that they were the same day necessarily just because of the half-life. Because
But on paper,
math isn't happening for me.
yeah, on paper, so you see you have those 2 mice that died on the same day.
Yeah.
One has one level of carbon-14, another one has a different level of carbon-14. On paper, after a certain number of years, they should have the same ratio of carbon-14 to
Right, but
carbon-12.
if we found them and we didn't know when they died, and we see these 2 different levels of carbon-14, how do we know how far to go back if they're not the same gap?
Because of how much carbon-12 it has.
He's saying,
Yeah.
he's saying different ratios.
Yeah.
Kind of give.
Give the idea. So it's not how much, it's the ratio. Yeah. Yeah, Debbie and Sebastian.
So how does the carbon-14 decay into the carbon-12?
Good question. How does the carbon-14 decay into the carbon-12? Carbon-14 is what's considered an unstable element. So it has too many neutrons or protons or too many electrons. Those are what unstable elements are. So in time, they diffuse, they get rid of the excess stuff. So let me go back to that picture.
Yeah, and also, how can there be 2 different things of carbon? Because I just thought carbon was carbon, and there could be multiple kinds.
Yeah, it can be confusing. Yeah, well, isn't uranium isn't lead, but you may have some that have excess protons in them. So given the number of protons and number of electrons, it's still lead or it's still carbon, but they put the number at the end of it, lead 206, to tell you how many electrons it has or protons.
Yes.
Okay, so it's still lead or it's still carbon, but it's a different variation of that element.
Okay.
Good question. Deb?
Did they ever try to test lava, hard as lava, from a site where they knew the date?
Yes. And this is one of the things that were brought out. This is one of the discrepancies. It's right here. So Mount St. Helens erupted in 1986. We know that the basalt rock created by that is only 40 years old. And yet it's tested, the testing done for potassium argon says 2.8 million years old.
Why didn't they use 40 then and do the math to make it turn out 40 because they knew it was 40 years old and then adjust their
I see what you're
timetable
saying.
according to something they did know?
I see
Or
what you're
even
saying.
in Hawaii, all
Yeah.
that lava there, they know when it hardened.
Right.
And if
Why
they-
not take that as the start and the numbers that you get from potassium argon dating, adjust that. Say, okay, whenever it says 2.8 million years, we know that means 40 years. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying just change the scale. Use something you're sure of and change the scale of those other things.
Yeah, these things we're sure of, but the other layers we're not sure of. And they don't follow a scale. So something 40 years old would measure 2.8 million, but something 2,120 years old measured only 250,000. So there's not a same
But
scale
I'm just
there.
surprised science didn't change their measurements because it's disproved. I wonder why they didn't adjust their
Yeah.
calculations.
It looks really good on paper. It makes a whole lot of sense, these dating methods on paper. But when we apply it practically, well, there's must have been some discrepancy, some problem, maybe some leakage. but this date sounds right. We've tried several different dating methods. This one sounds right. That's the one I'll publish. That's what usually
I mean,
happens.
the one on the bottom is so ridiculous,
Right?
it would debunk any of their theories.
I agree. So,
I don't have a question. Just I just realized that between Mount Everest and St. Helens there's 2 years, but there's so many years in between the lab measure.
yeah, good point. That's probably the
I
best
just
way
noticed that right now.
to look at it, right? So 2 years difference between the actual rock ages, but a good 1,800,000. No, a good 2 million years between the potassium argon dating. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. It doesn't make it's very difficult, but there is a model that people are willing to let go of, and it's both. This is for both creationists and evolutionists. There's a model we have. We're unwilling to compromise that. This is where evolution stands or falls. If it can be proven that the fossils that we have in the fossil layer are no more than several thousand years old, evolution dies and it's gone. And so people are fighting to hold on to tens to hundreds of millions of years of ages. And that's, it's sad, but the Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. And if we want to believe something, we will find ways to justify it. And we gotta take warnings from that as well, because we're just as susceptible to that. Kelly, do you have your hand up? Okay. Any other questions? Great questions, Debbie.
Sorry, I want to make a comment. Like, if we've been industrialized for a couple hundred years, say, and we just about destroyed the earth with the ozone, the emissions, I can't imagine humankind being on the earth for a long period of time, because we would have ruined it thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
I just can't see us sustaining.
Yeah, and as we discover how quickly the human race is decaying through mutations. I can't remember the number of mutations per generation. First of all, it says if the mutation rate has been the same, we couldn't have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And number two, it doesn't look like we can be around much longer, because we're just decaying. We're getting worse and worse. We need hope. We need hope. Al, you had? Okay. Amal.
What is the implication on our worldview if we believe the Earth is, or life is millions of years old compared to a shorter time?
Good question. Yeah. And it depends on the context of your question. What is the effect on our faith? What is the effect on the Christian faith if the fossil record is
Worldview.
If the worldview evolutionary worldview or the atheistic worldview regarding the fossil record are true? If it were true that dinosaurs lived 66 to 230 million years ago and are extinct now, if it's true that life has been around for hundreds of millions of years, is that your question?
Yeah, and if the carbon dating those estimations are
true. Yeah. Okay. If I understand your question correctly, what that would mean is that man is a latecomer in history. Is a latecomer in history. The Bible says that death came through sin. One man's sin. And we know that's talking about Adam, because the context in Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15 make that clear. So it says death came by Adam's sin. But if the conventional interpretation of the fossil record is true, that means death was around long before man. Long before man. And that death is not a result of sin, it was part of, if there is a creator, theistic evolution teaches this, is that death was a process he used to come to man. Furthermore, if death did not come through sin, then Jesus did not pay the penalty for sin. Okay, according to the Bible, Jesus died for our sins and paid the penalty for it. But wait a minute, death has been here all along. Then Jesus' death doesn't save us from that. Doesn't save it. It was part of God's plan for him. So that's the big. The other thing is this, and more and more in the academic community believe that Genesis 1 through 11 is not historical. You can't take it seriously. If Genesis 1 through 11 is not historical, is not genuine history, that undermines the rest of the Bible. If I cannot believe that God created the heavens and the earth, as explained in Genesis, how can I believe that Jesus is the Son of God? How can I believe that what Matthew tells me is true if I can't believe what Moses told me is true? The Bible's unreliable then, historically. So it has a big impact, yes.
All right, so this is kind of going off of what you were just saying.
Yes.
So the Bible says that it was Adam's sin.
Yeah.
But didn't Eve sin before Adam, like, taking the apple? So how does, like, I thought it was more because of her.
Good question. Yeah, and that is interesting. Why do the New Testament writers point to Adam's sin as the culprit? It's interesting to note that Eve didn't know that she was naked until Adam ate the fruit. Okay, they both realized they were naked once he ate the fruit, and so it was. And I look at that as the two shall be one flesh. They're considered one unit.
So they both had to.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Any other questions? Donette, are you talking or do you have your hand up?
We're talking about Adam.
Okay. You had a comment on? Lee?
Rock, we're talking about we're dating rock solid. Is there a method of dating water?
Method of dating water. The question is there a method of dating water?
Frozen water. I was just looking up here when you were talking about it.
Yeah.
They're using ice cores.
Yeah.
Because I remember hearing this, and that's why I Googled it. They do try to do dating using ice cores.
Great, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah.
Cores, like they
Still the same basic of the carbon dating. It's very similar. It's just I read about it, and it has when they look at the ice core, they're looking at different phases of the ice itself, which is very problematic. Because imagine how deep it is, how you know it's
kind of like tree rings.
Yeah, it's kind of tree rings, so it's very uncertain. Even though the same thing as you have mentioned, Pastor, is that they do their best guess and what's available for them to apply as giving information. What you said is key. Their pressure to make certain decisions so they could be able to maintain their jobs and maintain their budgets. And it's constant. It happens everywhere. In universities, right now, the main issue right now is that budgets and what they're doing with that money.
Yeah.
And when they look at it, you know, they see and realize, why are we doing this experiment when it makes or whatever project when it makes no sense, even though it's spending millions of dollars. So it's very interesting.
And getting back to ice cores, one of the assumptions is again that the ice builds up at a static rate.
Right, yeah.
There was a story, I can't remember all the details, but in World War II there were some planes that had to land in Greenland. And they vacated and got out of there. And these planes were found under like 50 feet of ice. Only within the last, I think this century, under 50 feet of ice. And people were blown away by that because that is much more rapid than what was assumed to be ice developing. So again, the basis of any type of dating when it comes to ice is the assumption that it's a steady rate. But what happened in Greenland with those World War II planes shows that that's not the case. Things can happen much more rapidly, like that Surtsey Island. Very rapidly, all these things happen. Yes. Lil and then Omar.
Yeah, one last thing, a dire, that I mentioned last week, it was a dire wolf that they found.
The white wolf?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was a dire wolf that they found in Caucasus, and they couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
They found it.
Yeah, we think these things are extinct, and here they are. Yeah. Lou?
It would be hard to date ice because it depends on if the water is still, if the water is moving, how much ice would develop.
Yeah. Yeah, if we know the environment, we can go up north and say, okay, the ice is such and such thick, we know, that the temperature's been this much for this long. But that's very, very short rate. Josh?
Ice core dating uses the atmosphere, the trapped atmosphere inside. They don't test the water or like the.
I thought they didn't test the thickness of the
No, they
ice?
test they test the trapped atmosphere, and then they use dating from there.
And what do they find in the atmosphere that they date?
I think they test like the CO2 levels,
Okay.
level, like what they suggest is that's how they do.
Okay.
Ice cores can't test them that they won't go like 10,000 years, can't go too old.
Okay. Well, I do remember though this story about the World War II planes still blowing people away because it just seemed to be too quick. Someone had a count?
Yeah, like I said, when I was looking this up, when you were speaking, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 methods of dating ice core samples.
Okay.
And they're all very different. They have like radiocarbon dating, geochemistry, cosmic nuclei, things like that. So I'll just leave it up on the computer.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for your input. Any other thoughts before we close?
If you would like more resources or more information regarding origins, please scan the QR code shown. May God bless your day.